In the shadowed emotional landscape of the bold and the beautiful, where love rarely exists without consequence and betrayal often hides behind gestures of intimacy, the story does not begin with violence, but with stillness, an unnatural, chilling stillness that surrounds Sheila as she moves through Il Giardino with a calm that feels less like peace and more like preparation. There is something deeply unsettling about the way she carries herself in these moments, not hurried, not frantic, but precise, as though every step, every breath, has already been rehearsed in her mind long before it is carried out. Revenge, for Sheila, is not an explosion of anger but a carefully composed performance, and what makes it truly terrifying is the patience she brings to it, the willingness to wait, to observe, to let her victim walk willingly into the trap she has constructed with such quiet devotion. The dinner she prepares for Deacon is not simply a meal, it is a stage, a meticulously arranged scene designed to disguise cruelty as affection. The soft lighting, the familiar setting, the comforting scent of pasta, everything is chosen to evoke trust, to lower defenses, to make Deacon feel as though he is safe, even cherished. And perhaps that is the most disturbing element of all, because Sheila does not strip away the illusion of love. She enhances it, uses it as a weapon, turns it into the very thing that will ensure her plan succeeds. Deacon, sitting across from her, has no reason to question what is happening. In his mind, this is a moment of normalcy, perhaps even redemption, a chance to exist in a relationship that, however complicated, still offers him a sense of belonging. He smiles, he eats, he relaxes, unaware that each bite carries with it not comfort, but calculation, not nourishment, but a slow, deliberate descent into something far darker. What unfolds is not immediate, not dramatic in the way one might expect from an act of violence. Instead, it is gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A slight fatigue, a subtle shift in energy, a faint unease that can be easily dismissed as stress or exhaustion. Sheila understands that true suffering is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, creeping in slowly, allowing the victim to question themselves, to doubt their own perception of what is happening. This is not just about causing harm. It is about controlling the narrative of that harm, ensuring that when the symptoms appear, they do not point directly to her, but instead create confusion, uncertainty, and fear. Taylor becomes the first to truly notice that something is wrong, though even she cannot immediately define it. Her concern does not begin as suspicion, but as empathy, a recognition that Deacon is not himself, that something in his demeanor has shifted in a way that cannot be explained by ordinary stress. Yet her interpretation of these changes is deeply influenced by her own internal conflict. She does not see poison, she sees guilt. She does not see manipulation, she sees consequence. In her mind, Deacon's weakening state becomes a reflection of their secret, a manifestation of the emotional strain they have both been trying to suppress. And this misinterpretation becomes its own kind of tragedy, because it prevents her from recognizing the true danger until it has already progressed too far. As Deacon's condition worsens, the weight of that guilt begins to consume Taylor in ways she cannot easily contain. Every moment she has spent with him, every decision she has made to continue the relationship despite its complications, begins to feel like a step toward his deterioration. She does not yet know that she is not the cause, but that ignorance does not protect her from the emotional consequences of believing that she is. Her concern transforms into self-reproach, her affection into a source of pain, and the relationship that once offered her a sense of connection becomes something far heavier, something that threatens to define her not as a partner, but as a catalyst for suffering. Meanwhile, Sheila remains in the background, watching, waiting, absorbing every reaction with a satisfaction that is both quiet and absolute. She does not need to intervene, does not need to escalate, because the plan is unfolding exactly as she intended. There is a certain artistry in the way she orchestrates this, a calculated restraint that allows others to carry the emotional burden of what is happening while she remains untouched, unseen. Her smile, when it appears, is not one of joy, but of recognition, the acknowledgement that she has successfully rewritten the reality around her, turning truth into illusion and illusion into truth. Hope, drawn into the situation by her concern for Deacon, experiences her own unraveling as she tries to make sense of what is happening. Her instinct is to protect, to understand, to find a solution, but the lack of clear answers leaves her suspended in a state of helplessness that she is not accustomed to. She has always believed, perhaps naively, that problems can be solved through honesty, through effort, through care. But this is different. This is something that resists clarity, something that defies the usual pathways of resolution. And as she watches Deacon decline, her fear grows not only for his safety, but for the possibility that she is missing something crucial, something that could change everything if only she could see it. The turning point begins not with a dramatic revelation, but with a shift in perspective, introduced through Finn's involvement. Unlike the others, his approach is not driven by emotion, but by observation, by a willingness to question assumptions rather than accept them. When he examines Deacon's symptoms, he does not see stress or emotional strain. He sees inconsistency, patterns that do not align with the explanations being offered. His suspicion does not emerge from instinct, but from knowledge, from an understanding that the human body does not behave randomly, that every symptom has a cause, and that when those causes do not match the narrative, something is being overlooked. Finn's realization introduces a new kind of tension into the story, one that shifts the focus from internal conflict to external threat. The possibility of poisoning transforms the situation from a personal crisis into something far more dangerous, something that cannot be resolved through introspection alone. It demands action, investigation, confrontation. And yet, even as this realization begins to take shape, Sheila ensures that she remains one step ahead, manipulating the flow of information in a way that allows her to control not only what is known, but how it is discovered. Her decision to send an anonymous message is a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. By introducing the idea of poison without attaching herself to it, she creates a scenario in which the truth emerges not as an accusation, but as a revelation. This allows her to remain hidden, to observe the fallout without becoming its target. It also ensures that when the truth is finally confirmed, it carries with it a sense of inevitability, as though it was always there, waiting to be uncovered, rather than deliberately constructed. As the pieces begin to come together, the emotional landscape shifts once again. Taylor's guilt deepens, now complicated by the possibility that something far more sinister has been at play. Hope's fear transforms into urgency, her need for answers becoming more desperate as the stakes become clearer. Finn's suspicion solidifies into certainty, his role evolving from observer to protector, determined to uncover the truth before it is too late. And Deacon, at the center of it all, becomes both the victim and the catalyst, his suffering driving the narrative forward even as he loses the ability to influence it. The confirmation of poisoning does not arrive with relief, but with shock, a moment of clarity that only intensifies the chaos rather than resolving it. Because knowing what has happened does not immediately reveal who is responsible, and in that gap between knowledge and accountability lies the potential for even greater conflict. Accusations will follow, alliances will shift, and the fragile balance that has been maintained thus far will begin to collapse under the weight of this new reality. And through it all, Sheila remains exactly where she intended to be, not at the center of the storm, but just outside it, watching as the consequences of her actions ripple outward, affecting everyone except herself. Her final expression, that subtle, knowing smirk, is not just a sign of satisfaction, but a declaration of control. She has not only executed her plan, she has reshaped the world around her to accommodate it, bending reality to her will in a way that few others are capable of. What makes this story so compelling is not simply the act of poisoning itself, but the intricate web of emotional and psychological consequences that surround it. Each character is forced to confront not only what has happened, but what it reveals about them, their choices, their vulnerabilities, their capacity for both love and destruction. The conflict is not confined to a single moment or a single action. It extends outward, touching every relationship, every assumption, every belief that once felt secure. In the end, the true horror of Sheila's plan lies not in its execution, but in its impact. It is not just about harming Deacon, but about destabilizing an entire network of connections, forcing each character to question what they know, what they trust, and what they are willing to do when faced with a truth that changes everything. And as the story moves forward, one cannot help but feel that this is only the beginning, that the real consequences of what has been set in motion have yet to fully emerge, waiting just beyond the edge of what can currently be seen, ready to reshape everything once again. In the volatile, ever-shifting world of the bold and the beautiful, the week of March 30th to April 3rd does not begin with an explosion, but with a quiet, dangerous misalignment, one of those subtle fractures that appear harmless at first glance, yet carry within them the full weight of impending collapse. At the center of that fracture stands Deacon, a man who has spent years trying to convince himself that survival is the same as redemption, now once again pulled into a web of choices that blur the line between desire and self-destruction. His secret involvement with Taylor is not simply an affair, but a contradiction so profound that it threatens to unravel every fragile equilibrium he has built, and perhaps more dangerously, every illusion he has carefully maintained about who he has become. What makes Deacon's situation particularly combustible is not merely the secrecy, but the person from whom that secrecy must be kept. Sheila, with her instinctive ability to sense deception long before it reveals itself in full, becomes the silent gravitational force pulling every hidden truth toward exposure. At first, she does not know the full scope of what is happening, but suspicion alone is enough to ignite the first sparks of chaos. Her perception does not rely on evidence as much as on emotional disturbance, and what she begins to feel is not a clear betrayal, but a disturbance in the pattern she believes she understands. That is often more dangerous, because it drives her not toward caution, but toward obsession. Deacon, aware of this danger on a visceral level, does not confront it directly. Instead, he reacts with instinct rather than strategy, choosing concealment over clarity, evasion over confrontation. His decision to hide, literally retreating into the bushes, shrinking himself into the background of a world he once navigated boldly, becomes symbolic of his internal state. This is not a man in control, but a man in retreat, hoping that if he becomes small enough, invisible enough, the consequences of his actions will somehow fail to find him. But in a world like this, absence does not erase truth. It only delays its arrival, and often makes that arrival far more devastating. Meanwhile, Sheila's departure from the immediate scene does not signal resolution, but escalation. Once removed from the moment, her mind begins to reconstruct it, not as it appeared, but as it must have been. Small details, Deacon's sudden plans, the presence of a pizza box in a place that should have been empty, the subtle inconsistencies that others might dismiss, become, in her hands, pieces of a narrative that grows more coherent and more threatening with each passing thought. Sheila does not simply remember, she interprets, and her interpretations rarely err on the side of innocence. This is where hope becomes entangled in a conflict that is not of her making, yet becomes her burden to manage. Her instinct is to protect Deacon, not because she believes in the righteousness of his actions, but because she understands the consequences of his exposure. In her mind, the lie is not a betrayal, but a shield, a necessary distortion of truth designed to prevent a greater catastrophe. Yet the very nature of deception ensures that it cannot remain stable. Each lie demands another, each hesitation invites scrutiny, and Sheila, with her relentless pursuit of clarity, is precisely the kind of force that can unravel such fragile constructions. Hope's internal struggle is defined by this tension between loyalty and fear. She knows that every word she speaks is being weighed, analyzed, tested against an invisible standard that Sheila alone controls. Her anxiety is not simply about being caught in a lie, but about what that lie represents, a growing distance between what she knows to be right and what she feels compelled to do. When she confides her concerns to Deacon, the moment is not one of comfort, but of shared dread. Both of them understand that they are not dealing with a problem that can be solved, but with a situation that must be endured, at least until it inevitably collapses under its own weight. At the same time, another storm begins to gather elsewhere, one driven not by secrecy, but by confrontation. Steffi's return introduces a different kind of energy into the narrative, one that does not hesitate, does not conceal, but attacks directly. Her anger is immediate and uncompromising, fueled by the realization that in her absence, boundaries have been crossed, risks have been taken, and decisions have been made without regard for the consequences she now must face. Her reaction to Taylor is not merely protective, but accusatory, rooted in a belief that Taylor has not only endangered herself, but compromised the stability of everything Steffi has fought to preserve. When that anger turns toward Deacon, it becomes even more volatile. To Steffi, Deacon represents not just a personal threat, but a pattern, a recurring force of disruption that refuses to remain contained. Her fury is not simply about what he has done, but about what he symbolizes: unpredictability, instability, and the constant possibility of disaster. In her eyes, his involvement with Taylor is not a mistake, but a failure, and one that demands accountability. While these tensions escalate, Sheila continues her silent reconstruction of truth, moving steadily closer to the realization that Deacon and Taylor are not merely connected, but involved. This moment of recognition does not arrive as a shock, but as a confirmation of what she has already begun to suspect. And with that confirmation comes a shift, subtle but unmistakable, from curiosity to intent. Sheila does not simply want to know the truth. She wants to act on it. What makes her particularly dangerous is not just her capacity for anger, but her willingness to transform that anger into action. Her response is not impulsive, but calculated, driven by a desire not only to confront betrayal, but to reshape it into something she can control. The threat she represents is not immediate violence, but the promise of it, the knowledge that once she decides to move, she will do so with precision and purpose. Parallel to this unfolding chaos, a seemingly lighter storyline develops, one that at first glance appears disconnected, yet echoes many of the same underlying themes. Brooke's curiosity about RJ's romantic life introduces a different kind of tension, one rooted not in danger, but in expectation. Her interest is not intrusive, but hopeful, driven by a desire to see something positive emerge in a world that so often seems defined by conflict. RJ's growing connection with Elektra offers a contrast to the darker dynamics elsewhere, yet even here, there is an undercurrent of instability. Their affection, expressed openly and without hesitation, creates moments of warmth that feel almost fragile in their simplicity. When Brooke and Ridge potentially witness one of these moments, it is not just a confirmation of romance, but a reminder of what remains possible, even in a landscape dominated by secrecy and betrayal. However, Elektra's discovery of something related to Ivy introduces a complication that threatens to destabilize this emerging relationship. Her decision to remain outwardly unaware is not born of ignorance, but of strategy. She understands that knowledge, once revealed, cannot be undone, and that sometimes the most effective way to navigate danger is to observe it without acknowledging it. This choice places her in a precarious position, balancing awareness with restraint, insight with silence. Meanwhile, Ivy herself operates with a sense of satisfaction that borders on arrogance. She believes her plan is unfolding exactly as intended, each element aligning with her expectations, each outcome reinforcing her confidence. Yet there is an inherent flaw in this perspective, one that often accompanies such certainty. Plans that appear perfect in execution often fail to account for the unpredictable nature of human emotion, the ways in which individuals react when pushed beyond their limits. As the week progresses, it becomes increasingly clear that every storyline, no matter how distinct, is moving toward a point of convergence. Deacon's secrecy, Sheila's suspicion, Hope's deception, Steffi's anger, RJ and Elektra's romance, and Ivy's manipulation are not isolated threads, but interconnected forces, each influencing the others in ways that are not yet fully visible. The true tension lies not in what has already happened, but in what is about to unfold. The characters are no longer in control of their circumstances. They are reacting to them, adapting to pressures that continue to intensify. Decisions made in moments of fear or desire begin to ripple outward, creating consequences that cannot be contained. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire situation is the realization that none of these characters are entirely wrong, yet none of them are entirely safe. Each is driven by motivations that are understandable, even sympathetic, yet those motivations lead them into conflicts that escalate beyond their control. The line between victim and aggressor becomes increasingly blurred, replaced by a more complex reality in which everyone is both. By the time the week reaches its inevitable turning point, the sense of impending disaster is no longer a possibility, but a certainty. Sheila's growing awareness, combined with her capacity for retaliation, sets the stage for a confrontation that will not simply reveal the truth, but redefine the relationships that have been built upon it. Deacon's attempts to hide will prove insufficient, Hope's lies will face their limits, and Steffi's anger will demand resolution. At the same time, Ivy's carefully constructed plan will begin to show signs of strain, as the very factors she has sought to control begin to behave in ways she cannot predict. RJ and Electra's connection, though genuine, will be tested by forces that extend far beyond their understanding, and Brooke's hope for something simple and joyful will be challenged by the reality of a world that rarely allows such simplicity to endure. In the end, what emerges is not a single story, but a network of collisions, each one amplifying the next, each one pushing the characters further into territories they are not prepared to navigate. The beauty of this narrative lies in its refusal to offer easy answers, its insistence on exploring the complexity of human emotion and the consequences of choices made under pressure. And as the final moments of the week unfold, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The most dangerous conflicts are not the ones that explode without warning, but the ones that build quietly, invisibly.